Good morning, everybody. How are you? I hope it's a good beginning to your week. A little Dvar Torah for today. You know, statistics and numbers don't always give you the whole truth. And in general, Jews have an aversion with numbers and counting. Walk into any shul, any little minyan on a Wednesday afternoon, and they're trying to see if they have 10 people, and you'll watch them count, but they won't count the numbers. They use a verse which is Hoshia et Amecha, which means to lift up your nation and to bless your flock. That verse has 10 words in it. And when they count the people, they don't count 1, 2, 3. They go Hoshia et Amecha, Baruch et Nachlatecha, Urim Benasim Ad Olam. And of course the question is why? Why not just say, hey, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10? Why is there an aversion to counting? You know, in the prophet, there's a painful episode where King David wants to count the people, and he asks Yoav ben Surya, his general, to go from city to city, from town to town, and to count the Jewish people. And Yoav pleads with him and says, no, it's not a good idea. We shouldn't count them. And King David insists, and he says, go. And reluctantly, Yoav goes and he counts the people, and he comes back to tell David, and David realizes he makes a mistake. And he pleads with God to forgive him for counting the people. Forgive me for what I did. And the rabbis tell us, the Midrash discusses it, that a terrible plague broke out and many people died. What's even more perplexing, so first of all, why not just count numbers? What's the big deal if you count numbers? Was there a problem to count 1, 2, 3, 4? Why do we do Hoshia et Amecha? Why do Jews have this aversion with counting? But then there's another question. You know, the book we're starting in the Torah this week, we finished Leviticus last week, we started the book of Numbers. Why is it called Numbers? Because at the beginning of the book, God counts the Jewish people. And then at the end of the book, he counts the Jewish people again. In fact, the rabbis tell us God counted the Jewish people. He did a census 9 times. 9 times God counted the Jewish people. What does Rashi tell us? The commentary Rashi says, listen. He says, God counted Jewish people because he loves them. He counted them when they left Egypt. He counted them when they sinned with the golden calf. He counted them later when he brought his divine presence. Because he loved them, he continuously counted them. So the question is, what's going on here? Rashi tells us that God counts us because he loves us. Yet, we know we don't count people. The Torah forbids us from counting people. The Torah clearly says in Exodus, how do you count the person? They each give a half a coin for the forgiveness of their soul, and you count the coins. You don't count the people. So could you count or could you not count? What's going on here? And the answer is a very simple one. You see, there's 2 things about numbers when you count them. One thing, when you count someone, you show that they're important. You're counting them. They count. They're not just insignificant. They count. They're important. You count each one of them because there's something of significance, of importance for them, if it's a census or whatever else it may be. But then there's something else about counting. Counting could be the greatest equalizer, but also be the greatest danger to show that there's insignificance and that people don't matter. In a prison, there's prisoner number 11, prisoner number 12, prisoner number 36. It's a psychological warfare telling you that here, you're only a number. There's no significance to you. There's just a number in who you are. The Germans knew this better than anyone, unfortunately. How to make people feel that all you were was a number. So from one sense, a number counts you. It shows you there's value to you. But from the other sense, it's a very dangerous thing. Wasn't it Stalin, Joseph Stalin, who said, one person dying is a terrible thing. 1 million deaths is a statistic. But there's something else interesting. When the Torah tells the Jewish people to be counted, the Torah doesn't use, what's the typical word we use for counting? Anyone know? Sfirat HaOmer. We count the Omer. We count 6 years, and on the 7th year we rest. We count 49 years, on the 50th year we have a jubilee. It's called Sefirah, to count. But when the Torah tells Moses and the Jewish people to count, it uses 2 other words. It uses pakod, which really means to remember, and it uses the word se'urosh, to lift up. What's going on here? Why doesn't Torah use the basic word of sfira to count? Why does the Torah tell you se'u, lift up, and pakod, remember? That's how you count. That's not a counting number. And their answer is, of course, something very deep and very profound, and a tremendous lesson to us as we all move to open up our country and to restart our economy, which I will get to on the other end of this. You see, when you count somebody, when you make a census, it's the greatest equalizer. The greatest scientist and professor and the simple boor. The layman and the sophisticated worker. The one who runs a hedge fund and the guy who lays bricks. All numbers, all ethnicities, when you count, it's the greatest equalizer. It strips you of all your layers. What I do for a living, what the color of my skin is, what language I speak, how I act to other people, how I interact with my community. It strips you of everything to the core of who you are, right? That's what counting does. But the question is, what are you at your core? So if you believe, like many in society believe, that at our core, we're valueless, we're one big zero, and then you build yourself up by what you do, by what you accomplish, by who you are, the things you do. So then, when you strip you down, when you count someone, you're making them valueless. Suddenly they're nothing. They're an insignificant number. But if you believe that a human being at their core is divine, is infinite, is a part of God, is the holiest thing that could possibly be, is the greatest thing. So when you strip people of all their layers of who they become at the core, you get a godly soul. You get the most valuable treasures you could have. You know the story, I always love saying the story about this observant Jew who was on a plane with his grandfather. This kid with his grandfather. And next to them was a secular atheist who also was there with his grandson. And the secular atheist, his grandson, was screaming at him and cursing him and being rude and obnoxious. And the religious guy, the observant guy, his grandson was so respectful and so the guy asks him, he says, hey, tell me, why is your grandson behaving this way and my grandson is behaving that way? He says, very simple. He says, you see, you believe in evolution. The further we go back, the closer we are to apes and monkeys. He says, we believe in God. The closer you go back, the closer we are to Mount Sinai, to God. So my grandson looks at me, he sees me as closer to God. He says, your grandson sees you, he looks at you as closer to apes and monkeys. It was a silly comment, but it has so much truth to it. When we count someone and we strip away their layers at the core, what are they? Are they valueless? Are they a zero that has to start and become something? Or are they divine? Or are they godly? Or are they something special? You know, in the film Judgment of Nuremberg, there's this American judge, Dan Hayward, sentences Ernest Janning to life in prison. Why? Because in 1935, Ernest sentenced, he was a judge, a very respected legal scholar, and he sentenced a Jewish innocent doctor to death. And when the American judge, Dan Hayward, is sentencing him, he pleads and he cries. He says, please, I never would have known, if I would have known that millions of people would be killed by the Nazis, I never would have done this, I never would have thought, and please forgive me, please give me another chance. And Judge Hayward looks at him and he says like this, you know what? You know when 6 million Jews got killed? It came to it. The first time you sentenced a man to death who was innocent. The first time you sentenced a man to death who was innocent, that's how 6 people died. Because the moment one soul, one human being is valueless, at that moment, there's no significance to 6 million either, as Joseph Stalin said that. So, when God tells Moses to count the Jews, and throughout the Torah, when God asks for counting, it's God asking us to count at the highest denominator, not as a zero, but as someone who's divine, who's worth so much, who is so important to society. Every single human being counts. Every single human being has something to contribute that someone else can. If you have 9 Moseses standing together, they can't make a minyan. But if you have 10 Joe Schmoes standing together, you got a minyan. You're able to do it. You see, when God tells Moses to count, when God tells the Jewish people to count, he wants them to be lifted up. He wants them to be counted for what their potential is, for what their value is, for what they contribute to society that nobody else could. And that's the difference between God counting and King David counting. When King David counted, why was he counting? In fact, the Torah tells us it's forbidden to count someone if all you're counting for is just to know your numbers. When kings count, sometimes when they make a census, it's all about to know how many people they have. It's about their power. It's not about counting you for your significance. It's not about your value. It strips you of your value. It's all about them. It's all about who they are. But when God counts, when there's divine count, it's not about God needing the power. It's God counting us because he loves us. It's God counting us because he sees the beauty, the significance in us. He sees who we are. And that's the danger. And that's why, we see a contradiction that Talmud asks us. In one place, God says that the Jews will be as much as the sound, will be counted like the sand of the earth. In the other place, he says they can't be counted. Very simple. Because when God counts, it lifts up. And sometimes when humans count, it strips you away of all your value. It makes you a number. There's a lovely book that was published a little while ago. It's called The Number on My Grandfather's Arm. And it's about this little girl who's sitting with her grandfather. And for the first time, she sees the number on her arm, on her grandfather's arm that the Nazis gave him. And she says, "Grandpa, what is that?" And he doesn't want to say. And the girl's mother pushes her dad, tell her. She needs to know. And finally the grandfather goes and he tells her the story of the Holocaust and why he has a number. And the granddaughter puts her hand on the grandfather's number and she says, "Daddy, Grandpa, you don't have to be ashamed. You don't have to be embarrassed to tell me the story. The Germans, the Nazis are the ones that have to be embarrassed." You see, numbers it's a paradox when you count. What are you counting? Why are you counting? And that's why, think of the brilliance. When the Torah tells us to count the Jewish people, what does it say? It says, Pakod, remember, and Tzurosh, lift up. The Torah is warning Moses, when you need to count the Jews, when we need to count them, we have to first remember their value. We have to remember never to forget the significance of each Jew, of each number. And secondly, we have to remember Tzurosh, that the counting has to be about them, about lifting them up, about their value. Not about their insignificance, not about that they don't count, that they're not something important, but their value of who they actually are. So the Torah says when you count the Jews, Suraish, lift them up. Yifkod, Pakod, count them. Remember who they are. And then the Torah tells us 2 things. First of all, the Torah says you can never count people just because. Just because you want to count them, there has to be a reason. And secondly, when you count, you have to count by their contribution, what they give, to realize that each one has something to contribute and each human being is special and unique. So I want to tell you something. There's a big debate raging, and it's been raging for 2 months. I never like speaking. We live in America. In America, everything becomes politics. Even a bloody virus that's killing so many of us and is such a devastating thing to our society is all about politics. If you look at the numbers and you look at the polls, they'll tell you how conservatives want the economy open. The liberals want the economy closed. Some people say, it's because a lot of the liberals have jobs. We don't have jobs. This one says that. Everything becomes politics. So the question is, should we open our economy or not? And how do we open our economy? So I'm going to tell you a little secret. I'm not going to answer the question for you today, but I'm going to tell you something of value, and I want you to think about this. We all understand that life is the most important thing that God gave us. We also all understand that we all need to be able to resume our lives at some point, to be able to have jobs, to be able to feed our families, to be able to see other human beings and come in contact with them, to be able not think about some elders who are so lonely or some people who live alone, even young. We all understand we need to open their economy and we all understand the value of life. But I'll say one thing. When we speak about numbers, when we say, oh, only 100,000 people died, or listen, at the end of the day, we can't shut our economy for 200,000 people or for whatever it may be. Look how many of this and look how many people die from something else. What should we do? That's where the mistake lies. The discussion has to be something totally different. We understand and we recognize the value of every single life. And every human being that dies from the virus is a tragedy. And to their family, and to their community, and to their children, and to their parents, and to their friends, they'll never recover. That loss will be with them forever. That's the first thing we need to recognize and acknowledge the pain, the suffering. And then we have to recognize, how do we come to some sort of way where people could regain their life they miss so much. But when it's all a number, a common denominator, that doesn't understand the value of each significant human being, that when you strip away the layers, we all have divine spark to us, then we're in trouble. Then the discussion is wrong, and then we're down the wrong path. So I'll conclude with this before I tell you a little story. I'm not going to answer you how to open the economy and when. That's a discussion for politicians, for professionals, with the advice of scientists, of doctors, of people who understand the risks and could balance all our interests for the best of every human being. And I'll leave it up to them. And I'm not going to get into the political part of it. All I want to beg and plead by us is that when we talk about numbers of death of human beings, or if people, even if you're talking about numbers of how many people are suffering of depression as they are quarantined, recognize, pakod, remember, and se'urosh. The reason we count should be to lift up, not to make a common denominator, but to lift up and realize the intrinsic value of each person. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, blessed memory, every Sunday, he gave out dollars for hours upon hours. The Rebbe was 90 years old. I remember going myself as a young kid. And the Rebbe would stand, and he would have his two secretaries next to him that would push him at each moment another dollar, and he would give it to each person and look in their eye and give them a blessing. The reason why the Rebbe did it, the Rebbe said, is because people would ask the Rebbe questions, and the Rebbe would answer them and bless them, and why did he give them a dollar? And the Rebbe always quoted something very powerful from his father-in-law, the previous Rebbe. The previous Rebbe said that when two Jews meet, the first thing they have to discuss is how do you help a third Jew. So the Rebbe said, if someone's coming to meet with me, I'm going to give him a dollar, make him a messenger to give it to charity. So together, while we discuss, he needs a blessing, whatever it may be, I'll give him. But I want to help a third person. So once this old lady came to the Rebbe, and she saw that the Rebbe would stand for 5, 6, 7 hours, and he wouldn't sit down. He would only stand. He would look at each person and give them their moment. And the Rebbe didn't go out to the restroom. The Rebbe didn't go out to get a drink. The Rebbe did it straight. And one time, this older woman, similar to the Rebbe's age, who loved the Rebbe very much, came by and said, Rebbe, I can't understand. Why are you doing this? Don't you get tired? How do you stand so many hours? Why don't you take a break? Why don't you sit down? Why don't you get a drink? And the Rebbe looked at her and said, when you count diamonds, you don't get tired. To the Rebbe, each Jew was a diamond. When he counted, when he saw, it was se'u, to lift up. It was pakod, to remember their value of who they are. That's the power. And that's the reason why God counts the Jews 9 times. The book Bamidbar we're about to start is numbers. Yeah, when God counts, it's to lift up, it's to see the value. And that's something we all have to be careful of as we go on with this discussion. Have a great day. See you again tomorrow.